Welcome everyone to the panel breakout this afternoon at the Field Advisor Forum. I'm Jennifer Jones and I'm a research specialist with the ISA, and we just want to thank you for joining us this afternoon. So today's discussion is going to focus on the latest updates from the University of Illinois breeding and variety trials. So I'm excited to be joined by our two panelists. We have Dr. Jessica Rutkoski and Dr. Eliana Monteverde, both here at the U of I. Before we get started, I have just a couple of housekeeping items. If you are a CCA, we have CEU credits at the sign-in sheet, and it's available after the session. I believe that'll be in the side room over there. This panel is also being live streamed on YouTube, so if you want to share the link out, now's your chance to share it with your friends to let them tune in. So really quick, I'll do some introductions of our panelists. We have Dr. Eliana Monteverde here. She's an assistant professor and plant breeder in the Department of Crop Sciences at the University of Illinois. She leads the soybean breeding program at UIUC, where she also teaches and advises graduate students. Her research focuses on seed composition traits, helping soybeans play a critical role as a global source of oil and protein. Dr. Monteverde earned master's degrees in biology and genetics from Pediciba in Uruguay, and a PhD in plant breeding from Cornell University. And then we also have Dr. Jessica Rutkoski, who is an assistant professor in the College of Aces at U of I. She specializes in small grains breeding and quantitative genetics, leading the winter wheat breeding program here at U of I. Her mission is to develop wheat varieties that enhance farm profitability in Illinois and neighboring states. Her research integrates technologies like remote sensing and genomics to improve plant breeding and variety evaluation. Dr. Rutkoski earned her PhD in plant breeding from Cornell University and spent 5 years supporting plant breeding programs in developing countries before joining the U of I. And please help me give them a warm welcome. All right, so we do have a panel set up today, but we're standing because they're both going to take a second to do an introduction through slides. So Jessica, we'll let you go ahead and kind of kick off with your introduction and brief overview of what you do at U of I.
Yeah, so it's an honor to be here as a wheat person in a group of soybean people. So I'm a wheat breeder. I work on improving wheat production, and I focus a lot on improving double crop profitability, because that is, 80% of the state's wheat is grown ahead of soybean. So I have these 3 bullet points here, kind of summarizing what I work on that is relevant to this group. And so I work on developing elite, early maturing wheat varieties, and also helping companies, private companies, identify varieties among their germplasm that are also high yielding and early. So we have our own breeding program. We also help private company breeding programs get the data they need to make those decisions. We also provide official performance data on wheat with the variety testing program, providing all the important agronomic traits as well as maturity time, so that we can get better standardization of when these varieties mature. Different companies have different scales, and they call things by different names. It's not quite like in soybean varieties, you have the numbering system, and wheat varieties don't really have that. So we're providing that standardized data so that you can really compare apples to apples across a bunch of different companies and their varieties. And also we have some research that we're looking into identifying varieties of wheat that lose moisture more quickly. So we think there may be variation in that as a trait. So we may be able to that may be able to help us improve yield with and get early varieties, because usually there is a trade-off. Usually, earlier varieties would tend to be lower yielding, so we're always looking for ways to break that. So just want to point out with our variety testing aspect of the research program, we provide data on varieties, wheat varieties released in the state. This data is available online, so you can look at yield across locations, test weight, and then something that is new is maturity time and jointing time. Maturity time is critical because With double crop soybeans, the sooner you can harvest wheat, the earlier you can plant. And as we saw earlier, well, you lose half a bushel soybean yield per day the later you plant. So earlier wheat means planting the soybeans earlier, better yield in the soybeans. So just saying, we have all this data online. This is just a snapshot of one of the tables. So you can Google search wheat variety testing, you'll find it. And I just want to talk a little bit more about the maturity and the jointing time information, because this is new and maybe unfamiliar. So did it work? There we go. So if you look at, this is the growth cycle of wheat, all the different stages of development. So a critical one, which happens in March, usually, is jointing. That is when the wheat becomes vulnerable to spring freeze. So, or any, just freeze, right? But it's spring at that time. So temperatures below 26 degrees Fahrenheit will cause damage to the crop. So we don't want too early of jointing, because then you'll be vulnerable to freeze. And then the last one over there is maturity. That's usually late June. So what we're, when we're trying to select for earlier maturity, sometimes we get earlier jointing, and that's bad. We don't want that. So we want to identify earlier varieties that don't joint early. Okay, so that's why we're providing this information and evaluating it. So in that table I showed you, you have maturity time. You also have the jointing time. So you want to try to, if you're looking for an early variety of wheat for your double crop soybeans, you want early maturity, right? But you do not want early jointing. You want normal or late. So you want to avoid early jointing when you're selecting the early maturing varieties. Okay. This is a picture, actually, just to show you the impact of freeze damage after jointing. Last year was a perfect storm for getting freeze damage in wheat. So, and we have so many plots, you're bound to see it somewhere. And we did find some plots that got completely damaged by spring freeze. This picture, right, so you can see that wheat is very unhappy looking, right? It's like there is no grain in those heads. You walk past the plot and it's broken stems with no grains. So the frost will damage the stem and it will cause sterility. So it can be a really big deal. So you do not want early jointing. So if you're interested in looking for a good wheat variety for double cropping, I have some tips here. Consider yield as well as maturity time, because maybe it'll be very early and you'll gain soybean yield, but if the yield is too low on the wheat, that will not help you in terms of profitability. So you got to consider both. You want to avoid the varieties that joint early. That is critical. And remember the other important traits too, right? Test weight, scab resistance, all those other things still matter. All right, that's the end of my summary. So I can pass the baton to Eliana.
Yep. Thank you, Jessica.
Yep.
So, hello, everybody. And are they coming up?
Do we have Eliana's slides?
It's okay if we don't. There were only 2 slides, actually, but well. So what I'm going to talk about right now is the 2 projects we have running with ISA now. So as Jennifer said, our program is 100% conventional, non-GMO. And one of our focuses, of course, yield increasing, but also, but also focusing on seed composition traits too, both like protein and oil, of course, but I would like to focus on other nutrition components of seed components too. And I'm just trying to see if my slides are there. It's fine, don't worry. So one of the projects we have now with ISA is evaluation and commercialization of soy lake varieties. So soy lake varieties are lines that have a modified fatty acid profile. So the oil that is extracted from these varieties is high in oleic acid and low in linolenic acid. This makes for a much more healthy oil because it's low in saturated fats. And also this oil, because of the low linolenic, makes it extends the shelf life of this oil, and it doesn't get rancid as fast as regular soybean oil. The idea of this project is to recover that market share that was lost of soybean oils that were lost to palm oil and canola oil. So again, this trait is a non-GMO trait, and it's composed by 4 genes, 2 for the high oleic and 2 for the low linolenic. These 4 genes are patented by the University of Missouri, so we license these genes from them. And this project, what allows us is to evaluate our lines in more environments. So we're currently evaluating our lines, our soy lake lines in 6 different locations across the state. And we have been releasing varieties since 2022. So, and our varieties are now available to sell. So then the second project we have with ISA is diversifying the resistance, genetic resistance to soybean cyst nematode, or SCN. So as you know, one of the main sources of resistance we have for SCN is the 88788 resistance, which is composed by 1 gene. We've been playing with this resistance gene for over 20 years, and now we're seeing that there is a resistance break of these varieties. So now the nematode is able to overcome this resistance. Then we have the peaking type of resistance, which is composed by 2 genes. And then we have a bunch of other genes that were detected that we know they provide resistance to SCN. The idea of this project is to develop and evaluate both varieties with 88788 resistance plus other SCN resistance genes, and varieties with peaking resistance plus other genes too. Sort of try to so these varieties will have like a broader resistance to more HE types, and also this resistance, the idea is like to be more, we can extend this resistance over time too. And thanks to this project, we are able to both develop and introgress these resistance genes, and also to evaluate these lines in the field. And yeah, that's all I had to tell you about this project.
Great, thank you, Eliana, Jessica. So they kind of set the scene for us of what they're working on, some of their ISA-funded checkoff research, but also just what they do in general. So hopefully that got your gears turning on some questions that you might want to ask these 2 experts. But I'll go ahead and kick it off with a couple questions here while you guys think about what you want to ask. So both of you are involved in some capacity with the variety testing here at U of I that's run by, we have Clay Harper here in the room, and Darren Juice, who also run the variety testing. So what kind of collaboration do your programs have with the variety testing?
Mm-hmm. Well, in our case, the soybean program, we collaborate with variety testing. So most of our locations outside of Urbana are ran by they go through variety testing. And also, we also collaborate with some technicians in my program. They also help with variety testing too.
Yeah, in our case, we took it on, all the testing, so planting, harvesting, phenotyping, and summarizing the data. So basically the majority of the work, except Darren Darren has been still coordinating a little bit with people participating, so we work together in that aspect. But it's been great for us because we are able to get all the contacts on good trial coordinator, trial cooperators. And in our breeding program, we are using the same locations as the variety testing program, and so we kind of consolidated and made it more efficient. And then, and also it's been really interesting learning about all the companies' varieties and how their characteristics and how they compare to ours. And so we've learned a lot in that process. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so Jessica, you talked about traits that are important in wheat in the double crop system. Eliana, are you and Jessica collaborating through the VT program to actually look at the double crop system in different parts of the state?
We are not currently, but that's something I would definitely.
So the
like to
question,
talk about.
sorry, the question was if these two are collaborating through the variety testing to look at the double crop system. So, yeah.
Yeah, no, we're not doing that as of now, but it's definitely something at least I'm interested in.
Yeah, it's a very good idea.
Yeah.
It's I'm a little hesitant about like doubling the testing program, of course, because of the resources involved. But yeah, we definitely should look into it.
Yeah, especially because, so Jessica's project that's funded through ISA is looking at, as she mentioned, at jointing time and trying to get soybean varieties in earlier after wheat for double crop. And so I know these two, I've been in conversations with them where they've kind of chatted about, oh, maybe we can look at different varieties of soybean after the wheat together and different things. So I think there's definitely stuff that will be coming down the pipeline. So if you're in the room and you have suggestions too, I know these two have always been open to hearing suggestions from growers around the state too. So. Question in the back?
So you're talking about variety testing year to year, but over time you've seen less and less variability. And it seems to me that there's a lot less participation of the major companies compared to the variety testing. Is there anything you can do to get wider participation across the industry?
Okay, so the question was basically there's less participation of larger companies in the variety testing, and how are we able to get more companies involved? And I guess, I don't know if the two of you feel comfortable answering that, but we also have Clay Harper in the room who maybe can chime in as well.
Well, I think on the wheat side, the size of the trials or the number of participants has remained pretty high through the years, but I think that it's gone down a little bit more for the corn and soybean, and I'm not really sure why. I think there's other providers of data, like there's like some other companies that are offering that. So on the wheat side, that does not exist. So I think that is probably a big factor.
Yeah, that's definitely a factor in soybeans. I mean, we have that difference. We have like these big companies that are involved in soybeans here in Illinois, but they're not so much with wheat, so that's why we have less competition in that sense.
Here, I have a microphone for you.
The first trials definitely seem to be the biggest competition for the variety testing program. And my conversations with the seed companies, the entries for our program have been cut down because they've increased their entries in the first program. I'm only going into my second season of managing the variety testing program, so I'm still working with the companies to see what we can do, but I'm hopeful that this year we don't take a big drop in entries.
Yeah.
Is there a correlation between early jointing and yield? And what is the highest yield that you've ever had?
So we're still understanding the jointing time because this is the first year we measured it. So, but based on what we've observed initially, there's sort of an optimum. So you don't want too late of jointing and you don't want too early. You want it to be in the middle. And because we've seen like if it joints really late, the yield's really bad, very on the extreme end. But the extreme early is also bad. So sort of you want the middle ground. In theory, slightly earlier jointing, if you didn't have the spring freeze issue, in theory, you could have a longer longer period of that stem elongation phase, that would be beneficial for yield. But I don't really see that in our environment. I think there's so many other factors with the weather. Was there another question? Oh yeah, the highest yield I've seen like in a research plot, I think 160 bushels per acre, yeah. Probably higher, but then I didn't believe that number. So that's the highest one that was believable. Like 170. I don't know. It's just, yeah, I don't believe it, but 160 I can believe.
So Jessica, what do you think the northern limit for double crop is? You know, I've been around here for 40 years, and we could never double crop in Champaign until fairly recently. So how far is it going to go with your earlier varieties?
So, you know, that's a good question. With time, I think it will just creep north, like how it's creeping. But, you know, if you think of the state like divided into sections, like south, central, and north, it's like now it's central is becoming, that's double crop area. So eventually, maybe it will, if the trend continues, then in 30 years, northern Illinois will be double cropping as well. So that's my guess.
How far north is it now?
Like central Illinois.
Okay.
I mean, even then, central, it's sort of not I mean, the results are maybe not reliable enough to get a lot of people interested. But then there's always the issue of like corn is very high yielding in this area, so economically maybe it won't make sense. But you never know in 30 years.
I'm seeing it more in Knox County, that's for sure.
So do we have any double
Yep.
croppers in the room now too?
Hold on, John, 1 second. Okay. Let me run. I'm a mic runner now.
I think whether or not the double cropping or the wheat production region moves significantly north in force is just one part of the component, because if we can get better utilization of good earlier varieties from here south, the impact on the bean profitability in the double crop is something that could be the bigger component and provide other options, you know, maybe as we creep north. But so I don't think it's an either or type of a proposition.
Right.
And a question for Eliana on the little, is it the linolenic?
Yeah.
My tongue tie is
Linolenic.
messed up. I've heard from some folks that from companies that were interested in the processing of those beans for the oil quality, and they have led me to believe or told me that originally they were kind of looking at locating production areas and processing in the South, say Arkansas, Louisiana, Mississippi, in that area, because the bean, that type of bean growing in higher temperatures tended to promote more expression of that oil or different quantities of that. And so, and is that the case that you're seeing, or how you know it, or was I led astray?
Well, in our case, our oil, so we know it's, the oleic oil is higher than 80%, and the linolenic is lower than 3%. So it's a very high quality oil, and I think right now is the kind of like the best you can have. As far as the oil composition in the South, I haven't heard much of it, but in general, seed composition traits tend to do better in the South than in the more north you go of the U.S., the worse both protein and oil quality get usually.
Sure. In part of my conversations with them, I encourage them to look at locating in Illinois versus down there because of the problems with herbicides and weed resistance and things there that are much worse than they are here. Plus, we have better processing and transportation capabilities to serve that type of market. Plus, we've got a tremendous amount of double crop acres. So if we could grow those beans, if that was the case, that the expression or the quality was more in a hotter environment, to place those in a double crop environment here would make a lot of sense.
Yeah, that could be. I know we have a process, non-GMO, at least oil processing plant in Indiana. That's the closest we have, and that's when it's quite new.
Thank you.
Yeah. So on the vein of Soy Lake, Eliana, how do those varieties yield-wise compare to like the Pioneer Plenish variety, which is their high oleic, low linolenic, and then compared to a commercial check as well?
Right. So all of our trials, multi-environment trials of our Soy Lake varieties, we use both Plenish and Pioneer non-Plenish checks. And our varieties usually, the best ones, they yield higher, a little higher than Plenish, like between, the ones we choose are usually like 104%, 105%. Some have been 110% over Plenish varieties. And compared to Corteva checks, Pioneer checks that are not Plenish, they are close to like 90%, 98%. So usually one trend we see with high oleic, low linolenic is that high oleic, low linolenic varieties, whole varieties, they tend to yield less than conventional non-whole varieties. And we yet don't know why, but that's the case also with Plenish varieties compared to Corteva non-Plenish varieties too. They usually tend to yield less than, Plenish varieties tend to yield less than non-Plenish varieties for the same company. So this is a trend we are seeing. We're trying to overcome that trend, and I think over time we could, but with more breeding, we'll be able to, but it's a trend we're seeing right now.
Yeah. Oh, Kelsey's coming with the microphone, sorry.
How is aggregation and distribution of those soy lake lines being handled? So you talked about that plant in Indiana. Are there aggregators operating in Central Illinois that are taking people's crops and then bringing them there, or are the growers responsible for trucking?
So as far as I know, I don't know. I don't know much. So but all that information is in the Soy Lake website. No.
Yes, and I was just going to pull up an email from a colleague, actually, too, who works on the market development side at ISA, and we were discussing where the solvent extraction plants are in Illinois for just non-GM in general, not Soy Lake specifically, but there is ADM in Decatur and Cargill and Bloomington, and then International Flavor and Fragrance in Gibson City. So there's also a small organic GM expeller based in Tampico, Illinois. So as far as like Soy Lake specifically, there isn't a plant that's dedicated to that solely yet, but those others will take them.
Yeah, as far as I know, here in Illinois, we don't have any. So the closest one is the one that is in Indiana.
Yeah. Yeah.
On wheat breeding, when you start looking at maturity levels, the vast majority of growers, especially in the Central Illinois belt, once we get out of what I'd call wheat country, all they see is early maturing, mid, and full season. Can you kind of break into a little bit of what is really days that separate that? I feel like it could be 1 or 2 days, and growers get really worked up on it. And I didn't know if you had thoughts or an opinion as to what really makes that maturity range or classification.
Yeah, so first of all, just to give you the range that we see in the varieties that we're testing in the variety trial is 9 days. So that's a 9-day difference in maturities. And that is, that's like from the earliest to the latest. And I would have to emphasize there that most companies do not enter their very early varieties in the trial because they know it might not compete head to head with the later ones. So they will usually not enter those. And we're trying to encourage them to test them more. So we're working on that. But so that's a 9-day range within, and that's like kind of excluding the ultra early. So I think if you included it, maybe it'd be 10 or something like that. So a 10-day range total probably. And the different groupings, it's about 2 days in between them. So there's a lot of different categories. So there's like late. Interestingly, nobody classifies their varieties as very late. So there's just late, and not very many people classify them as late. Probably nobody. But in my table, I start with late. Okay, so there's late. 2 days later, on average, will be medium, and then there's medium early. 2 days later, medium early, and then there's early. That's another 2 days. Then 2 days after that would be very early, and then I think that's where I called it. But there's other, like, companies will use even like very, very early, ultra early, and there's another category now, hyper early. So it's all over the place, and that's one of the objectives of our project here, is to provide the standardized data so that you actually know what you're getting, because you could call it whatever you want, practically, unfortunately. But I'd say, yeah, you can expect the range. So, for example, like one of the most popular pioneer wheat varieties is like 25R74, was popular for a long time. That's considered a medium early. So then probably the ultra early, whatever a company would be calling ultra early, is probably 5 days earlier than that one. These are rough estimates, but just to give you something. Yeah.
Hold on, Stephanie. I'm coming. And I know most people may know this, but you may not know this. Even in soybean varieties, I'm used to have my marketing hat on. And just because they say it's a 3.4 doesn't mean it's a 3.4. We could have had a gap in our lineup, and we needed a 3.4, so we made one a 3.4. So you have to keep that in mind as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
More questions? Oh, coming back at you.
Any trends in bearded versus non-bearded varieties in those trials, especially if it comes down to your joining timing?
That's something I haven't really looked at, but just based on observations, I have not seen any real genetic difference between the bearded and non-bearded. There are obviously, where the variety comes from is going to be associated with the head type. So certain breeding programs are going to basically always give you bearded, and the other breeding programs are going to give you smooth. And then there's different like strengths of those programs. So what you observe, like say, oh, well, these bearded lines are always like later. It may be because it came from a breeding program that has later varieties and bearded. So when you see, there is no real genetic cause of that. It's just associated based on where it comes from. Yeah.
So Eliana, when you were describing your projects, you were talking about the new SCN project you have with us. Do you have like a timeline on when those varieties might become available to growers?
So last year, yes. So last year we released 3 varieties that had, I call them enhanced peaking resistance, and 1 variety with 88788 enhanced 88788 resistance. So this enhanced peaking resistance have like 1 additional resistance, SCN resistance gene, and the 88788 have 2 SCN resistance genes in addition to 88788. So those varieties were released in 2024, beginning of 2024. So they went to seed increases in 2024, and now they should be available. So we, as the university, we don't commercialize our varieties, so we license them to third parties. In our case, our SCN varieties, not the Soy Lake one, but all of our other varieties are mostly licensed to Baird Seeds. And yeah, so they should be able, and Baird Seeds.
Okay, and that's Baird, like B-A-I-R-D?
B-A-I-R-D, yeah.
Okay, Baird. So is that based out of like Northern Illinois, or do you know?
Williamsville.
Williams?
Yeah.
Okay.
surprise, I have another question. So I've just recently learned some new things that I guess I never thought about before. I used to, work for a seed company, and now I'm on the other side where we're helping to fund all this great research. But let's say you discover this great big new trait or something awesome, right? Or something that's big. What challenges are you up against to try to get a company, a larger company, seed company to, for example, new SCN resistance? What steps do you have to go through, or what help do you need, or what are the challenges to get that basically your latest and greatest new thing into the industry?
Yeah, so, well, on the one side, there's all like the legal side, which is handled by the university. It's like, doesn't have to do with me. But also another thing would be advertisement. And so I'm working on developing a website for the program, but of course, ISA's help, would be a great help in order to advertise if we ever discover that great trait. Yeah. That would,
Oh, me? Like to get to disseminate varieties more, or? That's a good question. I hadn't thought about that. Yeah, I don't know. I need a sales team, I guess.
exactly. Yeah, me too. One of the things I would love to have, but yeah. And also by me personally, I'm not great with social media. So that's another, disadvantage. But yeah, so now that I'm having more students, we're going to open our Instagram website and Twitter, or whatever it's called now, website. And yeah, so the idea, if they can handle it, we can advertise what we do in more platforms and to a bigger audience too.
Any other questions from the crowd?
Oh, I have to say one thing.
Yeah.
So this goes back to the bearded smooth thing. Our breeding program is mostly all smooth head varieties, and there's companies a lot of times say, well, we only want bearded. So sometimes that is a barrier to, I have a great thing, but so-and-so only wants a bearded line, so I can't. Right.
Yeah.
So yeah.
How do you guys engage with farmers to hear what their needs are, and then are there ways that farmers can engage with companies to help share your needs?
Well, I think, just attending these events, and, I am on the board of the Illinois Wheat Association, so I interact in that capacity. But yeah, really pretty limited, I would say, in that area. But so yeah, these questions and these forums are really useful in kind of getting that hearing. Even just listening to other people's presentations and the panel is really important.
Yeah, they're a good way to advertise what we do. Of course, ISA's help. ISA is a big help for us to also advertise our work. And yeah.
Hold on one second. Coming right.
So in your research, what has been the biggest surprise for both of you? Did you go, oh my gosh, I didn't know that, or didn't expect that?
Do you want to go first?
I'm thinking.
Okay. I have a lot. So probably too many to talk about up here, but there, I like to say, almost every time that you go to a field and take notes or pay attention to what you're doing, you see something that you don't understand, and you don't know why. It's interesting, it's weird, and you're like, why? And you don't know what it means, so there's just so much. And then there's a lot of things you read in the textbooks or in the handbooks, and then you go to the field and you're like, no, that's not correct.
Yeah,
So
sometimes they contradict what you see in the field, or the observational aspect, it contradicts what the textbooks say.
So, for example, something related to jointing time. So we were measuring this in the field, right? And then I was in a field, and there was a part of the field that it missed the nitrogen, like the application. It was, the cooperator had to miss a patch because not to spray ours twice, something like that. So there was a whole patch that did not get the nitrogen application in the spring. And I'm taking the notes, and then I decided, I should check this and compare to the one that got the nitrogen, because I want to see if the nitrogen affects the jointing time. And both were jointing at the same time. So that one that had missed the nitrogen was jointing at the exact same time as the one that got the nitrogen, and they looked completely different. The one that didn't get nitrogen looked like there was no biomass. It was really bad looking, really bad. And when you look at it from afar, you would think this is just vegetative wheat, this didn't joint. But when you go and cut the stem, it's jointed. So that's something that's written in the books, and everybody believes that nitrogen timing effect, if you put nitrogen on, you will cause the wheat to joint. And then I saw that that was just an example of a surprise.
Yeah, so one thing in my case, right now I'm revising historical data from the breeding program and data from many different locations. And one of the things that really surprised me was how much protein content varies across locations, different locations in Illinois, across years too. Of course, you kind of have that idea that protein depends on the environment. Protein content is dependent on the environment. But I didn't know sometimes I see differences of 4 or 5% between locations for the same lines. And that actually surprised me a lot. I didn't know the variation was so big. And that can really, if you're looking for a high protein variety, that can really, that really affects the amount of protein you can extract from your crop, depending on where you planted it, or how good or bad that year was. So that really surprised me. And you don't see that big variation in oil content. So there's a huge variation in protein content, and also I'm looking also at amino acid profile within these lines, and also there's a huge variation on amino acid content, particular amino acids. They vary greatly across locations, and that was very surprising to me. So it's kind of protein has to be treated the same way as yield in that sense.
You have time for one more? One more question?
Yeah. Oh, there's two.
Maybe a couple more.
Yeah, Jessica, I'm convinced that part of the problem with double crop is the wheat straw, the inhibit in the soybean.
Yeah.
And I realize, early grain is great, but is there variation in harvest index among soybean varieties? And could you select for one that had high harvest index, which would be less straw?
You mean the wheat, right?
Yeah, wheat. Yeah, I'm sorry, wheat.
No, yeah, that's a good question. So you're saying, are you thinking shorter or fewer tillers?
No, just a higher harvest index. I guess it's 50% in wheat, and if it was 60, I'd have a higher yield with less straw.
Yeah, I think that's going to be hard to achieve. I don't think it's unachievable, but biomass and yield's pretty highly correlated. So I know some people say that, don't know if this is true, that there is certain aspects of the straw that are more desirable for double cropping. Apparently there's some varieties that they say when it just the straw disintegrates. And so I don't know what that means in a scientific term, but there could be something there too.
Mm-hmm. Did you say there was one more?
There was one more in the back.
Okay.
Or maybe on.
We just have time for one more, really. We got to switch here in a bit.
Okay.
Which one?
I think
in the back.
this one first.
They'll be around afterwards, right?
Yeah.
You can ask questions.
Kind of piggybacking off of that, Central Illinois, we really struggle to get double crop to work if you do try it. You guys looked at strip cropping with that, where you're planting a 40-inch strip of your wheat and then coming in April 15th with your 2 rows of beans and then cutting the wheat over top and kind of letting the soybeans grow up underneath that.
So this, you're talking like relay cropping? Yeah. Yeah. No, we haven't gotten into that. I've heard a lot of mixed information. Some people say that it's very difficult to get that to work at any kind of scale. So I've been avoiding that for that reason, and just because it's, people are not very many people are enthusiastic about it. There's a few people that are enthusiastic, but it's a very small number, so don't know.
Eliana, have you heard anything about relay cropping?
No.
No? All right, well, I think we need to wrap up so you guys have time to transition. So let's go ahead and thank our panelists, Jessica and Eliana.